it angered a witch. I believe it's no secret to anyone that due to military work, we often travel to different communities. It's a job that requires us to be constantly on the move because of the missions we are sent on. It wouldn't surprise anyone to know that as soldiers, we often enjoy spending time with some local women, making promises of a serious relationship that we definitely know we won't be able to fulfill, both due to our work and the fact that in many cases, we have partners back home. The truth is, I'm not proud to say it, but I was one of those soldiers who, despite having a wife and children, didn't mind meeting other women during my travels and missions. Once, we were sent to a zone for a mission that was confidential at the time, so I don't want to delve into it much as it's not relevant to this story. What I can say is that it had nothing to do with the organized crime, as it is usually done. The task was quite straightforward. We only had to do a kind of patrol and send a report. This mission was so easy that basically we had a lot of free time. We used to go to the downtown of this place to visit the pubs and try to meet some women. During the initial days, everything was normal until on the third day, we met a woman who seemed very attractive to all of us from the moment she walked in. At least for me, it seemed she was out of my league. My friend didn't think the same and bet us that he would take her to bed that night. We all accepted the bet, and he went to talk to her. We thought he wouldn't succeed, since she showed no interest, but it only took a short conversation for her to become more cooperative. That night, they left the bar together, and my partner didn't return to the base until the next day, as he was very close friends with the commander. He faced no repercussions. He came boasting that he had accomplished it, won the bet. The truth is that for us it wasn't a big deal. We just thought it had been another woman on his long list. That same night, when we went to one of the bars to hang out, about an hour later, the woman arrived, went up to where my friend was, and started talking to him. He no longer wanted anything to do with her. He just didn't know exactly how to tell her without sounding rude. At that moment, we teased him, saying it looked like a very serious relationship. She stuck to him the whole time we were there. When we left, but the truth is, I didn't believe him. I knew my friend, and I knew that in order to convince any woman, he would tell them what they wanted to hear. For obvious reasons, I assumed he had told her he wanted a serious relationship. We kept teasing him the next morning while making the rounds. When we started our journey, we encountered her blocking our path, making us stop. This situation was no longer enjoyable, as we had a schedule to keep. We advised him to get rid of her once and for all. He was skilled at conversing with women, but also avoided conflicts, especially if the other person started crying. We insisted that he should end things with her or stay behind while we continued. He mentioned having work, got into the van, but didn't break up with her at that moment, allowing her to believe they were still together. We had to stay in that place for about 2 months, and to my friend's misfortune, this backfired. Every time we went somewhere, she would always find us, spending all her time with him. She didn't allow any other woman to get close to him, which started to wear him out. My friend told me that whenever he tried to end things with her, something always stopped him. On one occasion, we went to a local market to spend the afternoon. My partner met another woman who showed a lot of interest in him. They were talking when his alleged girlfriend arrived. It wasn't a situation that could be disguised. Obviously, she knew what was happening and started making a big of jealousy. Everything was chaotic for a while. And in the end, my partner, trying to maintain a tough exterior, yelled at her and told her that he had never promised her anything and that he was tired of her asking him to leave him alone. When he said that, everyone around us fell silent, but not with pity in their faces. You could tell they were waiting to see what would happen. They looked at the woman and then at my partner, as if they were expecting her to do something. But instead of reacting violently, the woman began to cry and walked away. People kept staring at us strangely. So, we decided it was time to return to base. This colleague had behaved in a similar manner before, and we didn't like how he treated people. However, we didn't feel we had the authority to tell him how to live his life. On this particular occasion, we felt the woman had been too intense. We thought that would be the end of it all. But the next morning, my colleague didn't up for breakfast. We went to look for him in his room and realized he seemed to be sick. It was very odd that he had gotten sick overnight, but not impossible. He was shivering and kept saying he was very cold, despite the warm weather in that place, especially in the mornings. He had a high fever, and the nurse attending to him told us it had started since dawn, and she hadn't been able to bring the fever down. If he couldn't manage it within 1 hour, he would have to call to be transferred to a hospital since those levels of fever were not normal. He couldn't do the rounds that morning, so the rest of us went to do them. When we finished, we decided to walk through one of the parks to relax a bit. Shortly after starting the walk, we came across the woman. Initially, we thought about ignoring her because the whole situation from the previous day had been uncomfortable. However, she stopped in front of us and stared at us. We thought she was also upset with us, so we just waited for her to speak first. She greeted us very kindly and asked about our sick colleague without giving it much importance. She mentioned that he hadn't been feeling well, which is why he stayed at the base. She smiled in a very strange way, almost as if things had turned out the way she wanted, and then walked away without saying goodbye. It seemed odd to us. We noticed the issue but continued on our journey, and then returned to the home base. Upon arrival, we realized that our colleague was in a worse condition than before, now developing sores that seemed to be decaying at an alarming rate. The doctor was doing her best to keep the area clean, but we were unsure of the illness he had. They put him in quarantine, as well as us, to prevent further infection. Since we had been in contact with him in the previous days, the nurse mentioned that she had already called for him to be transferred to another hospital because they suspected it could be leprosy, even though he did not display all the symptoms. There was no other explanation. Despite assurances of support arriving within an hour, the two trucks that tried to pick up our colleague encountered difficulties. One had a serious accident that claimed the driver's life, and the other got lost at some point. The driver claimed to have followed the specified route, as if he had passed through the location where we were without seeing it. They were trying to send another truck, but this whole situation was becoming very strange. As I mentioned, all of us were in quarantine until we knew what was happening. None of the others had shown any symptoms. We were just waiting. We were very surprised by the symptoms that my colleague was experiencing, because it wasn't just the welts that seemed to appear out of nowhere. I mean, he wasn't scratching or even moving, but every second he was turning around his body. I don't know how else to explain it, but it was as if the veins inside him were popping out and were perfectly marked with a vibrant blue all over his body. Gradually, he started to struggle to breathe, and we were there without knowing exactly how to help him. Unfortunately, in that place where we were, there were not very skilled doctors. They had a rather inadequate medical facility, and for obvious reasons, we couldn't move him there if it was something highly infectious. The only thing we would do is spread it throughout the town. Our only hope was for the arrival of aid trucks to transfer him to another location. But no matter how many trucks arrived, the same thing happened. They either got lost or had accidents, basically leaving us trapped in that place. One person volunteered to take this colleague out of town in one of the trucks we already had, but it seemed like they had all suddenly broken down and stopped functioning. As night fell, although he was still in a terrible condition, the nurse had managed to stabilize him. He was lying there. They had given him oxygen because it seemed like he was struggling to breathe more and more. Since they didn't have the necessary equipment, they couldn't secure him. But the nurse claimed that it seemed like all his organs were slowly shutting down. He had purple lips and dull eyes, but I insisted that what I had seen was very real. We started searching all the places where that woman could have hidden, but we couldn't find anything. We were so focused on searching for her that we didn't realize my colleague had gotten up from the bed. We only noticed when he tried to walk and accidentally knocked over the oxygen tank he was connected to, falling to the floor. In the process, his health was so deteriorated that his body could no longer stand. We all turned and tried to help him up, thinking he might have fallen by accident. We reassured him that he would be fine. But then my colleague looked at all of us. His once dull eyes now had a very strange gray color, to the point that you couldn't even see the pupil. It was almost as if he was already a corpse. Suddenly, without warning, he started banging his head. He slammed into the oxygen tank with such force that it dented it from the first blow. We tried to stop him from causing further harm, but it was futile. Despite his weak appearance, he seemed to possess much more strength than usual. There were 4 of us trying to hold him down, but he still managed to break free, occasionally to continue banging his head, not only against the tank, but also against anything in front of him. We started shouting to call the nurse and get a sedative or something similar. She heard us and entered shortly after. But before she could inject him, he stopped moving. The nurse began the resuscitation process, but it was all in vain. He couldn't be brought back. We were very puzzled by what had happened. The following morning, the trucks that had tried to arrive the day before finally made it, but it was too late to help. They took the body to perform the necessary autopsy. So, since none of what we were telling made much sense, neither did the mysterious illness that apparently had killed him. We remained in isolation for a few more days until it was clear that we were not infected in any way with any deadly or new virus. Instead of continuing with the mission, we were sent back to our homes, given a kind of mandatory and paid break. About a week later, we were separately summoned to give our account of what we believed had happened. Each of us recounted what we remembered from the days leading up to the incident, as well as the final hours of our colleague's life. All of our statements were filed away, and for many years, I didn't know what had become of that case. After that vacation period, we were sent back to different places, and slowly, the death of that colleague was forgotten, remaining only as a strange story to tell. But not long ago, while chatting with an individual who worked performing post-mortems for the military, I shared this tale. To my surprise, he was one of those who attended the post-mortem of my colleague, and informed me that he had never encountered something so peculiar in his life. He mentioned that when they opened my colleague's body, it appeared to be filled with hair. I inquired if he meant the stomach, but he clarified that the hair was all over the body, almost like the stuffing of a plush toy. Unfortunately, he was not allowed to speak during the official post-mortem, where it was concluded that my colleague had been bitten by a venomous snake. That was the story shared with the public. However, both he and the other attendees of the post-mortem knew it was a lie. In such cases where there is no concrete explanation, they were forced to remain silent. Personally, the only explanation I have been able to find is that my colleague angered